Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Hey, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Hey, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio / RV dining room, located directly inside America. Anyhow, welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Once again, your host of Operation GCD here, JJ Vance. Thank you. Love the topic as well, as far as you can love these topics of satanic murder and satanic ritual abuse and the propaganda psyops that we are subjected to as a result. Anyhow, your host of Operation GCD, JJ Vance here, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. And we are live / Tara Jackson. And folks of the interwebs, thank you again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. Will be your pilot navigator for tonight's shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And to answer your question there, Mind Hack, that is Garbage Can Dude, Operation GCD, but it is also the manner in which I look at crime, generally speaking, and that is the greatest common denominator. So, anyhow, I'm not gonna lie to you folks of the interwebs. Thanks again for joining me here tonight. Got a real barn burner here on deck for y'all tonight. And that is the anatomy of the Satanic Panic, starring everyone's favorite psychological warfare U.S. Army Special Forces officer, allegedly, and I do stress allegedly, because I don't think this doughy bastard here, Mikey Aquino, ever passed any sort of Special Forces physical fitness exams. Anyhow, we do see him starring in these matters along with his old pal. And for folks who aren't aware of this, according to McMartin preschool victim's mother, Jackie McGauley, Muppet Mikey, and his pal Ted Gunderson, old laser tag Ted, would talk on the phone every day in the late 80s and early 90s during the McMartin saga. And if you all don't know Ted Gunderson, here he is.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
Watch out, folks. They got Ted twice. Stay vigilant. So we are going to be discussing these matters of the psyops to mind war of Muppet Mikey Aquino and his Satanic Murder Inc., the Phoenix program come home, as Dave McGowan's thesis goes in his Program to Kill book. We're going to be unpacking more of those things here tonight. Yes, sir. Cincinnati schemers are better or worse than the schemers. Well, I think that's the Cleveland Steamers, sir, and I don't want any part of any of that, to be quite honest with you. But the Satanic Panic, it's a long one. You know, this is a multi-decade panic. We see folks like Aquino and his buddy in the psyops to mind war documents, the paper they wrote together, the QAnon General Paul Valle. So, in fact, he's on the advisory board of Turning Point USA, as we recently looked at. Anyhow, so when we're looking at these matters of this ongoing panic, you know, it is important to note that there are other characters that play a role in these things. We've gone over a few of them. We'll look at more tonight that span the test of time and cover these multiple phases of the panic. So tonight's phase 3, we're looking at that 1992 landing report by the FBI. You know, those very ethically minded, morally proper folks there at the Federal Bureau of Investigations, which that report is strikingly similar in 1992 to the 2008 Midwest deaths report by the FBI as well, where they uninvestigated the smiley face killer deaths. So much like the propaganda evolves as we're seeing through these phases, and we're going to look at tonight the volume of murder and ritual abuse in that 1992 to 2008 time period. And we're going to, again, see the need for the evolution. We're also going to look at, again, some of the characters that go on throughout these different sagas, not just Muppet Mikey and Laser Tag Ted. Folks like Catherine Ramsland, who went undercover in the vampire cult movement and said they're nice people. They're not murdering folks. And that's interesting because I have a number of vampire cult cases to review tonight, not the least of which the Vampire Clan, the Kentucky Vampire Clan, whom I kind of encountered Rod Farrell and his gang. I got the full tour shortly after those events from Rod Farrell's foster family. In fact, as I look more into that, that's a great case example of not only a confirmed ritual human sacrifice by Rod Farrell himself, says that, the vampire guy, you know, and his foster family and foster brother, a guy I call Roundhouse Luke. He was some sort of roundhouse karate champion, national champion. Anyway, he was a youth preacher to these folks. He was the same age as Rod Farrell and myself there. And he would preach to that vampire clan. So, the more I've looked into these things over the years, I got introduced to that stuff back in March of 1997. Shit. When I went on spring break to Murray, Kentucky for the pot. It was after the marijuana, to be quite honest with you. Anyhow, and my dude's cousin was Roundhouse Luke, lived next door to my dude's grandmother, which was our HQ. But I got deeply introduced to that vampire clan, and then I look later, years later, and I look, and it's you gotta look at it. I find out, looking at the victimology, that's something I often stress in all of these parapolitical, especially satanic homicides. And it turns out the father, the Windorf couple that's murdered, the father, the man, the husband, the father of one of the new recruits in the cult, he's the son of Billy Graham, evangelical preacher, Billy Graham's personal attorney. And on top of that, that man's wife, the murdered victims, the mother of the new cult member, as I look into it even further in this occult genealogy of America, well, she's from Logan County, West Virginia. She graduated high school with my aunt, Logan High School, and furthermore, she's my cousin twice over. That woman who was ritually sacrificed by the Kentucky Vampire Clan, Naoma Adams Windorf, she is in fact twice descended from Abner Vance. So, and I am 4 times descended from Abner Vance. So we're cousins numerous times over. So these are interesting factors, but we see in this 90s campaign, this vampire cult business, which really erupts back in 1974, 1975 from Michael Aquino and his wife. And that's when they start the Temple of Set. Their first order is the Vampire Order, which Lilith is in charge of. So, and she's also out there setting up covens and cells like Aquino is by their own admissions. So, yes, sir, Chad Steele, thank you much for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. Thank all of you folks of the interwebs. We'll be doing a Patreon preview here. And then the other half is, do a deeper dive there on patreon.com/Operation GCD. And we do live in a Muppet world, ma'am. It's a full-blown Muppet world. Full-blown. So, and what night here at Operation GCD would not be complete without my favorite CIA AI bot, Bill Colby Ballwasher, RR channel. I salute you, sir, to your dedication and service to being wrong on damn near everything you say. But what do we got here tonight? Phoenix program come home as a fantasy. Well, let me ask you this question, sir. I almost can't pay anybody. I could never pay anybody to come up and bring me the wrong points that you bring up on time, every time, right on time. And in regards to this one, what are your thoughts on we discussed him a little bit last week, Richard Ramirez, who had a one-on-one meeting with Anton LaVey in San Francisco prior to going on his Merkin spree in 84 there in Los Angeles under the guise and protection, I would argue, and later prosecutions of those murders, put all the murders on Richard Ramirez when I suspect there's evidence that there's more, but nonetheless, Charles Manson's friend Ira Reiner, the district attorney. Yeah, he's an interesting character. But anyhow, we see Richard Ramirez, his guardian, was a Phoenix program assassin, his cousin, whom he grew up with in El Paso. So, again, RR, I salute your service and dedication to being wrong, but it keeps me motivated. And again, great point, by the way. So we see these matters, and a lot of evidence to support these things of the Phoenix program come home and satanic serial killers, Satanic Murder Inc. And, and all these matters, thank you, Mind Hack. The Finders is another example of matters of national security. And that's what all of these things get shut down over regarding satanic ritual abuse of children. And that one's well documented. They had photographs of the children there in the Finders cult, who were IT contractors to the CIA, by the way. And Marion Petty, when he was in the Air Force, he would drive around generals at the Pentagon. That was his job. His son, speaking of Bill Colby's ball washers, here we go, Marion Petty, the head of the Finders, his son was indeed a pilot for Air America. You know, that drug trafficking operation of Colby Squares. You have to stand by. I forgot to plug my computer in here. Anyhow, also in regards to the Finders, we see photographs of them doing animal sacrifices, particularly with goats. Strangely enough, Sidney Gottlieb, famed CIA MK Ultra fucker, had a goat farm right down the street from the Finders. Go fucking figure. So we see all these matters. We see a lot of things connecting principles in these things. And again, we see characters like Catherine Ramsland, who wrote that book with BTK. You know, we went over BTK a little bit last time, and that Kansas City activity, geographic activity that spans from the early 70s to 1992 with the Lanning report. So we see the need for the overlapping serial killers and ritual abuse in a place like Kansas City with the Bordello, with BTK at the same time frame, right? The Butcher of Kansas City and BTK. We see Catherine Ramsland writing a book with BTK, which I would argue is bullshit. Because here's the deal. When we look at the BTK case as dictated and described in Program to Kill with Dave McGowan, the first murder is unlike any of the rest, first and foremost. You know, we're not going to get a lot into that one tonight, but relative to Catherine Ramsland, it's interesting because the first murder, quadruple homicide, I believe it was, of a whole family there attributed to the BTK. The father had some spooky military connections, was an expert in martial arts, had told his son that he was in fear for his life, and somehow this fat doughy bastard, the BTK, murks the entire family overnight in their sleep, and I believe their dog. The rest of them are all bind, torture, and kill of women after that. That's interesting. So speaking of these matters of a hit, with those vampire murders of the Windorfs, you got Billy Graham's personal attorney's son. Again, evangelical movement. We see where the satanic panic and their operations run through the evangelical movement in 75, beginning with the Process Church, John Todd, Mike Warnke, etc. We've already gone over that in past shows here. And we'll obviously dive more in the future when we go back and take down those layers of each phase. But that is phase one in the evangelical movement. We see Billy Graham's a big figure in there. This is his attorney's son. And we also have descendants of Abner Vance, where I argue, and have strong circumstantial evidence to support which, including DNA evidence. Abner Vance was the son of George and Martha Washington. So we see Mrs. Windorf is twice descended from Abner. So these matters, I think, are far stranger than even they look out on appearance. But then we see someone like old Catherine Ramsland, Brian Kohberger's professor, who she's dipping her hat in a bunch of nonsense relative to that business. But we see her shit coating all of these matters, laser tag Ted style. Oh, I went undercover in the vampire movement. They're very friendly folks. Meanwhile, there's a 200-mile radius of vampire murders surrounding the area of Fort Knox, where old Muppet Mikey and his gal pal / wife there, Lilith, started the vampire order, which I believe predates their Temple of Set. And it's obviously something that went on with the Temple of Set, but they initially started that, I believe, in 1972, 73. So the 90s and part of that radius, we don't just have the Kentucky Vampire Clan. We got two Kentucky vampire cults. We got the 1994 murder of Philip Gall in Dayton, Ohio. Now, Catherine Ramsland says that's not, it's not murders. It's not Satan shit. Well, here's the deal. She's out there shit coding it because, again, the vampire business is all derivative of the Satanism, just like the werewolf LARPers, like as we've described with Mike Lucchino's affinity for those Nazi SS guerrilla warfighter units, stay behind units, Operation Gladio style, which is what he describes in his own book of why he, the framework for his werewolf sects of Satanism. So we got werewolves, we got fucking vampires, man. It's fucking wild. But we also have Catherine Ramsland, shit-coating BTK, shit-coating vampires, saying vampires have nothing to do with Satanism. that's an interesting perspective because they seemingly have a lot to do with Satanism. Not only that, it seems like the epicenter of activity falls in the wake of Muppet Mikey and his wife. Typical. So, in fact, let's listen to Catherine Ramsland talk about a little bit about that, what I'm talking about right now, going undercover in these vampire movements.
More of like kind of a role play situation, or are these actual like vampires that actually drink each other's blood?
It's all of that. It was, at the time I was in it, it was a huge subculture, thousands, tens of thousands of people. The internet, there was no social media at the time. The internet had really just started. There were chat rooms, there were ways to connect. There were live action role-playing games. Then people would travel from one city to another for weeks at a time, playing out their roles. And the attraction is different for different people. Some wanted to be vampires because they wanted that sense of power and transformation and supernatural, larger than life aura. Some wanted to be victims. Some wanted to be vampire hunters. Some shapeshifters would get into this subculture. It overlapped with the goth subculture. So it was really quite rich.
Was there ever anything you saw that made you uncomfortable? Like, what was the craziest thing that you saw while you were pretending to be a vampire?
I think the blood sports was probably the craziest, where people would cut themselves, scarification, it was called.
So one of the things they addressed in that same interview, again with News Nation, classic propagandists there relative to the Brian Koberger situations, but Netflix was going to release a documentary on a 1994 murder in Dayton of Philip Gall, where a Dayton PD officer went undercover and he concluded that they were murdered out of this industrial rock club called the Asylum. Industrial rock, part of that neo-process movement that begins in 1992, 1993 around Genesis Peorich. Boyd Rice, that neo-Nazi Satanist fellow we hear talk about a lot of Nazi shit, Tracy Twyman's mentor, Boyd Rice, and also Trent Reznor's mentor. So we see Trent Reznor, Marilyn Manson, and the Tate Polanski death house starting the industrial rock movement under the guise of Genesis Peorich, Boyd Rice, who also are the mentors to Skinny Puppy in their Process Church album in 1993. So we see a lot of those things coalescing in that same time period, post-landing report, the evolution of activities, the evolution of propagandists. So we see old Catherine Ramsland going undercover at that time in the 90s. Yeah, and this is at a time when these vampire cults are picking up, 94, 95 there with the Kentucky Vampire Clan, and folks aren't familiar with that. I got a clip here for that one.
On the morning of February 1st, 1896, a teenage farmhand discovered the headless body of 22-year-old Pearl Bryan in a field in Fort Thomas, Kentucky.
Whoops, that's not it. That's actually the murder of Pearl Bryant. So a lot of these ritual homicides, they, again, as I've mentioned before, they predate the term Satanism in 66. Pearl Bryant, that's the turn of the last century, the 19th century. So she's allegedly murdered by two fucking dentists. Those are continuing creepy dental activities. Stay vigilant for lasers and dentists. But we see Pearl Bryant gets beheaded, and the place that she's beheaded is now Bobby Mackey's Country Music Hall in Wilder, Kentucky, just outside of Newport, Covington, Kentucky, right across the river from Cincinnati. Now, that Kentucky Vampire Clan I was talking about with Rod Farrell, I was introduced to them by my dude Grizzle, whose father was the bassist for the Bobby Mackey Band. And before that, he was with some other country acts, Loretta Lynn, I think, stuff like that. But nonetheless, it goes back to there's a site there. Pearl Bryant was allegedly sacrificed in the basement of what is now Bobby Mackey's Roadhouse, country music roadhouse. Allegedly haunted, but a lot more to that tale. But nonetheless, that's the official narrative there. She's beheaded, and they found her head, and et cetera, et cetera. But it is, in fact, the bass player for the Bobby Mackey Band, his son, my dude Grizzle, who, in fact, was that man's father, that bass player's mother's, the grandmother of my dude Grizzle. I was staying at her home, and for the spring break trip in Murray, Kentucky in 97 to learn about the Kentucky Vampire Clan. And that was Homeboy's nephew, Roundhouse Luke, next door to that home, that was the foster family and youth preacher to that vampire clan. So when we're describing these tales, there is the official narrative, and listen to Rod Farrell describe some of that himself, but you know, my understanding, my full tour I got from Roundhouse Luke, and my understanding of the cult scene is Farrell was born into these things, multi-generational. His mother was a drug addict, prostitute. Her father apparently got her into cult activity. There was older folks. It's often described as a teenage vampire clan, the Kentucky Vampire Clan. There's older folks that were kind of dictating those activities. The same kind of reports we get across the spectrum of these cult activities from Son of Sam, etc. So I find all those things very interesting. But here is a clip on the Kentucky Vampire Clan. Maybe.
During Rod's questioning, he said he felt like he was in a dream.
And that's not the one I was looking for.
Pearl's story is also captivating.
Holy smokes, folks. Holy smokes. I'll get it right here in a second.
In the 1990s, Florida became the center of a chilling modern vampire tale. Rod Farrell, the leader of a self-proclaimed vampire cult, claimed to be a 500-year-old vampire named Vesigo. He wasn't just playing pretend. His obsession with the occult and thirst for power turned deadly. Farrell and his cult members traveled across states, committing crimes that escalated into a brutal murder in Eustis, Florida. Farrell savagely killed a couple with a crowbar, leaving behind a crime scene so gruesome it shocked the nation. He claimed the act was part of a ritual, further fueling his delusion of immortality. The case captivated and horrified the public, not only for its violence, but for the bizarre, vampire-themed cult that led to it. Farrell, sentenced to life in prison, remains a chilling reminder of how fantasy and reality can collide with devastating consequences. Would you have been brave enough to cross paths with this so-called vampire?
So we got the 94 Vampire Clan. We got the 94 Dayton murder of Philip Gall by them vampires. 96 Vampire Clan, who they murdered my cousin, and her husband, Billy Graham's attorney's son. And then we also have the fact that there's the ongoing shitcoat and cover-ups of these matters. So Netflix produced a documentary set to release it this past fall on that Philip Gall Dayton murder in 94 and canceled it. So, and it is interesting to see. We're also going to look at some of the ritual abuse scandals of this era. There's a lot of them. And the ones that kind of traverse the time frames of these phases from that 1982 to 92 phase, the Lanning Report. 92. We see that something like the Country Walk case and the folks who were involved in these things, it's interesting to see where they go and what they do in these later phases, like the person who did not properly prosecute this thing effectively, apparently, according to other later statements by other prosecutors on the case. The future butcher of Waco, the gorgeous, stunning Janet Reno, was the one that buried that one. And we see her doing a lot of other things, not addressing the satanic ritual abuse, satanic murder stuff in phase 2 here from her time as the Attorney General and the Butcher of Waco and so on and so forth. And we see the connecting principles from these incidents, these high profile incidents that we describe. You know, the Waco one's not often described as satanic. It is cult activity. And the folks are the ancient alien cargo cultists there at the Order of the Solar Temple, which is deep, royalty connections, the Hollywood Princess Grace of Monaco with Hollywood stuff and the royalty stuff there. They allegedly killed her. Anyhow, she was a member of the cult. But anyhow, that topic for a future conversation, because that was 1980, and this is 1992 to 2008 we're talking about here tonight. But my point being there is we see the Order of the Solar Temple's leaders were very butthurt on video recordings that the folks at Waco beat them to the punch. So there's a lot more to these stories, I think, when we unpack some of these cult activities and what they're really getting into, but nonetheless, we see a lot. We see the evolution necessary, the need necessary to evolve their psyops to mine more propaganda, that Nazi Satanist telemarketing script, right? Oh, you haven't read the Lanning Report? Clearly you're a moron. The Lanning Report from an FBI agent says, no, there's no Satanists. These are not the Satanists you're looking for. So Kenneth Lanning, we'll look into that report more tonight, dive a little bit deeper into that, and see why it's bullshit. See how they uninvestigated it. The same way it was uninvestigating the 2008 report on the quote-unquote smiley face killer deaths. And again, that's an evolution. I argue that's an evolution tied directly to a ritual human sacrifice taking place at the sites of ancient human sacrifice, the mounds. And we see folks like OTO Thelemites, like the Typhonian offshoot order, being specifically deeply involved with the mounds and their rituals. So we see, again, these are all Thelemites, Aquino included, and all of the Wicca folks all claim they all come from Crowley, and that Crowley's more Satanist than LaVey could ever be. That's a statement by Gerald Buckland himself, Wicca, one of the Wicca offshoot founders. So we see all of these matters and the evolutions therein. And again, we see the neo-process movement with Trent Reznor and gang, Boyd Rice's underling. So that first album in the Tate Polanski Death House on Cielo Drive in 1992, same year as Landing Report, is this EP Broken. In the music video, it is a proto smiley face killer ritual murder, kidnapping, torture, and sacrifice depicted in that music video. They also use the smiley face as a symbol of chaos within that entire movement. And it's interesting to note that those aren't the only connections there, but we do see the evolution, the smiley face killer situations being the evolution in some of that sacrifice satanic style. And we see also the Federal Bureau of Investigations in 2008 writing a very similar report to the Lanning report saying, oh yeah, we looked at it. These are not the Satanists you're looking for. There's nothing to see here. So we'll look at more of that here tonight. And obviously would be remiss if I did not mention matters such as the West Memphis 3, right? So we see in the West Memphis 3, that pops off as well. So that one highly cited as thelemic in ritual human sacrifice, following the principles, if you look at the characteristics of the murder, following the principles of Crowley, advocating for the ritual sacrifice of young children for personal and financial success. 8-year-olds, that's who they were, perfect ages according to Crowley. And those boys were sexually abused as well. And a lot to be said about that case. There's, again, Damien Eccles had polygraph keys in his interrogation that information only the killers and the law enforcement had. And that was all tipped off from his probation officer to the detectives. And again, lots of evidence there. I think there's a lot more to those stories to describe, but also relative to the vampire business, there's a vampire cult offshoot from that West Memphis 3 group. So again, we're looking at that early to mid 90s, post 92, a lot of vampire cult activity, a lot of ritual murders, satanic style. So we see the need for the evolution at that point when we start mapping these things out chronologically and geographically speaking, like that Kansas City flap or that Fall River, Massachusetts flap, which goes on through the mid 90s. From that Fall River satanic murders of in the late 70s there, and the phase 1 to phase 2 crossover, right? With right near that mental institution where my old stalker and almost PR rep, just kidding, I was never going to hire him, Buffalo Jared Revisa, the transpocalypse multi-state mind-controlled homicidal maniac assassin guy. And that mental institution he sits at right next to Fall River, but that shit goes on into the 90s, and we see that Nathaniel Bar Jonah was involved in ritual sexual abuse of children in that same precise area. He was in that same mental institution in the 70s during the Fall River flap, and they let him out in the 90s, and he's still involved in it in the 90s because, again, they let that dude out on society. He is the cannibalistic, kid-diddling, homicidal, psychopathic serial killer whom I came face-to-face with in 2001 and whom may or may not have fed me human meat burger in 2000 at the local Hardee's in Great Falls, Montana, because those bastards in Fall River area, Massachusetts, let him go loose. And he moved to Montana because his parents lived there. His father worked at the Air Force Base, and they were part of an evangelical church in town. That's interesting. So anyhow, and the judge that let him loose on society was the same judge. Speaking of process, folks are going to process those Nazi Satanists. The same judge that let Nathaniel Bar Jonah loose out of that mental institution in Fall River, Massachusetts there. Same judge that let Ted Kennedy walk on the whole Chappaquiddick incident. The thing where they were hiding some process-related activities from the RFK homicide and murder in the Ambassador Hotel. Because the lady that dies in Chappaquiddick was a key staffer in RFK's presidential campaign. That 1968 campaign where he, dies there when he's about to accept the DNC nomination there in Los Angeles in June of 68. And his June of 68 presidential Los Angeles team chock full of fucking serial killers. Not only do you have the Processy and Tate Polanski duo there on his presidential campaign of RFK there, you have not one, not two, but three serial killers, one of which got fucking awarded by the campaign. So he was like one of the top people in that campaign. So a lot of weird shit there, but the judge that let Ted Kennedy walk was, because, usually when you drive a lady off a bridge and then you leave her in the water to drown and you go home and sleep and then you go to the police, the next day around noon, typically they lock you up. Not Ted Kennedy. This judge said, he was a special prosecutor assigned to the case, the one that let Nathaniel Barjona out. Literally let him out, and Barjona's diddling and attempting to murder another fucking 10-year-old kid 2 weeks later. So, and then they give him probation, ship him to Montana, and no one checks his probation anyhow. So it is these matters that there's no one being held accountable, but we see the geographical area and pockets of activity. We see the temporally speaking as well, spatially and temporally, time-wise as well. So when we're looking at this 90s situation, it is interesting to see where folks like the Butcher of Waco, Janet Reno, the gorgeous Janet Reno, what she goes on to do relative to these matters, or not do, right? Not do. Again, she was the Attorney General, so she was in charge. She was the Federal Bureau of Investigation's boss. Yes, ma'am. Ohio headquarters, Society of Cincinnati. I would say yes. Cincinnati, Ohio is indeed the operational headquarters to this date of the Society of Cincinnati. And it's a town with a lot of mounds. We got a number of smiley face killer victims. I believe I addressed a little bit of this. I don't know if it was last Thursdays or Sundays now that I think about it. But these, it must have been last Thursdays. It was these ideas of remote viewing, because Michael Aquino's buddy, he's all wrapped up in that whole remote viewing program around folks like Colonel John Alexander, Alfred Stubblebine, General Stubblebine, etc. The guy, the jackass from The Men Who Stare at Goats, try to run through the wall. Alex Jones / Bill Hicks' buddy, frequent guest before he had passed a few years back. Stubblebine, that is. In those matters, I do think there's an element to those things. I think these bastards are selling us a raw deal, some propaganda on such topics. Nonetheless, there's a case of a smiley face killer victim in March of 1990. Nope, disregard. March of 2002. Lon Dowdle, Covington, Kentucky. Missing 5 days. No one could find him. They find him where he was already searched. They're at the confluence of the Licking River in the Cincinnati, or the Ohio River there in Covington, Kentucky. Just across the river from Cincinnati, just across the bridge, literally. And he still had cash, wallet, and a $10,000 Rolex. And they found the man through a psychic. A local psychic called the hotline and told the police where to go find this man. So you either imply the psychic had something to do with the cult, or there is a lot more to these matters of ideas of remote viewing. So anyhow, we'll look at some of those smiley face killer victims tonight as well, because again, that evolution, I'd say largely out of that whole neo-process movement, comes about largely in the mid to late 90s, but we see an evolution of that in 2008. So from circa 1997 to 2008, which is the early onset of the smiley face killer phenomenon, we see an evolution in that in 2008, where they no longer are targeting heterosexual men. They begin targeting homosexual men. I think that's an evolution in their mode of operations and tactics, finding it easier tactic to employ to entrap a homosexual man. For example, Dakota James in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 2017, he, like many other victims post 2008, seemed to have been tracked and stalked and hunted through gay dating apps. It's confirmed to be on one at the time of his disappearance. He had been on one 2 weeks prior when he was nearly kidnapped before and found by his friend. That's a whole wild tale. And he was missing 40 days, later confirmed by pathologist Cyril Wecht to have been tortured for those 40 days, and then his body dumped on a mound in Neville Island. So these things are interesting when we start mapping them out, again, geographically, time and space, spatially speaking as well there, and temporally speaking, and paints a different picture of the mass volume murder and fucking ritual sacrifice of animals and abuse of children. And we see over that time period, we can see the need for the evolution in both their propaganda, the Psyops to Mind War, and the evolution in their activities. So, and again, I do think that's exactly what we're looking at. Again, when we see the uptick in vampire cult murders, we see an uptick in smiley face killer murders. These are upticks in evolutions in satanic ritual human sacrifices. Satanic Murder Inc., the Phoenix program, Come Home, Psyops to Mind War, Muppet Mikey Aquino style. So let me see if I can catch up on a couple comments. I don't want to miss anything from RR. Those are my favorite. So when we're looking at all of these things, I think, Mind Hack, what you got? It strikes me that the process cult teaching that humanity is a plague on nature is the same thing the global elites. Absolutely. And it's by same thing as the global elites. Spot on. It's by no stretch of coincidence that they're devout Marxists in their own principles and belief systems, and they do espouse humanity is the devil. We see that we see that again in their evolutions. And I don't want to go too far into our current era of this panic, right? Of this satanic panic. This panic's been going on longer than I've been alive. I'm 45. It's a lot of fucking panic. Where was it going? Oh, yeah. So we see the 09A 764 folks. We see these school shooters like that Prado lady in Houston who bought her child some guns and some ammo, and he shot up at some schools and shit. She's wearing the Process Church t-shirt. She's got the Process logo on her arm like Lucien Greaves does. She's got, the head of the Satanic Temple, he specialized in the psychiatrist game of false memory syndrome. The same false memory syndrome folks like Dr. Richard Offshee, who was linked up with Kenneth Lanning in that 1992 Lanning report. So we see all these fuckers, they all know each other. But in this evolution, we see that Prado lady. She's also got Charles Manson, his face right there on her other arm. So look, me and Chuck are cousins a couple times over there. We're Maynard McCoys from Pikeville together. I'm not getting his fucking face tattooed on my fucking arm, but these psychopaths are, who then buy their children guns and ammo and convince their teenage sons that humanity is the devil. What is the outcome of that? Well, they're going to go kill people. And that is the purpose of Satanic Murder Inc. The framework in which to do this hood rat shit activities, be it murder, be it drug trafficking, or just general other hood rat shit activities. So that is the framework. We can see the application of that framework being played out in our modern era still today around the same people. The same ideas, the same concepts. Humanity is the devil. So, great point. Let me catch up on a few. Thanks again, folks of the interwebs, for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD on these matters. Again, we're going to be popping over to Patreon here in a moment. Patreon.com/Operation GCD. Apparently, if you go into Operation GCD Live, search Operation GCD Live from the Patreon search bar. You can also go to the link in the description, Linktree. Also, you'll find the link. And if you sign up for Patreon, a couple other administrative notes. I've been told there's issues with Android, so the workaround there is you get on a computer and sign up, and then you can access it from the Android app later once you have a sign in. And then I would recommend not doing Apple. I am not the vice president, but I would recommend not using Apple, as they charge like 30 or 40% surcharge. It's kind of fucking stupid. And I think that's my main notes there. And let's actually go over the rest. I got some real barn burners on deck for y'all, not just tonight, but we got a Mormon parapolitics roundtable tomorrow with Heidi Love and Jacob J from Rise to Liberty podcast. That dude keeps trying to out JJ me, and I'll have none of it. But no, I like his style. He's a sharp dude. Heidi Love's always bringing some great stuff to my brain hole and attentions, and I appreciate their activities and research. We'll have a real barn burner on deck tomorrow night, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Times here on Operation GCD Fridays. And then we'll also, let's see what else I got here. We got Sundays from last week, but before I get to that, also next Wednesdays, 9:15, the cult and or esoteric review of James Bond villains. So specifically Ernst Stavros Blowfield here on the left, the also known as Dr. Evil in the Mike Myers Austin Powers stuff, same character basis. And the other fellow right there is Le Chiffre. Now, according to the author Ian Fleming, Le Chiffre is based on Aleister Crowley. And Blowfield is based on Aristotle Onassis, JFK Jr.'s dad. So that'll be coming up on Wednesday. I got Clint Eastwood there from Third World Assassins YouTube, man who respects liberty and the Constitution as much as I do, and I salute him for that. And once again, Heidi Love, who's deeply interested in matters relative to Aristotle Onassis, and Aleister Crowley, and we've discussed a lot of these bond stuffs offline. So she and I have kind of been plotting on this show for some time. And then I got Operation GCD Sundays from last week when I was not amongst the living there on Saturday, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sundays and Saturdays this week. Got the Anatomy of a False Flag from the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. I did a show on him a few Sundays back. JJ, that's me, meets the Unabomber, sorta. Highly recommend folks check that out. Anyway, from the Unabomber to the Boston Bomber, you call in this Muppet, she'll clear that whole situation up for you and make sure that Patsy never talks. Because in the Boston bombing, her opening statement for her client, her Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, was, Your Honor, my client is guilty, but not for the reasons y'all say he is. Get the fuck out of here, dude. That's not a defense. But that is a Muppet defense, courtesy of Judy Clark, the Anatomy of a False Flag cover-up. And last but not least, definitely last, but still least. Okay, well, I don't know what I did with my Muppet. I've lost my Israel Keys Muppet, but Israel Keys invades Vermont. So this is a satanic Nazi serial killer who knew the fucking Keogh brothers, knew McVeigh, was connected to that Aryan Nations compound in Idaho. Well, he murked some folks in Vermont, and this is a great example and case study back in 2011 of Operation Gladio. Bill Colby's Queers, the Phoenix program come home. Because his murk, he did a home invasion of an elderly couple in Essex, Vermont, just outside of Burlington, near my old stomping grounds there. Fundamentally altered the way folks operate in that area. So that's what I mean by Operation Gladio. Terror and Bill Colby's Queers is precisely that. And again, they all fucking know each other. So that's coming up on Sundays. And we'll get into a little bit of that tonight because that his campaign of terror begins in the early aughts. So he starts doing a satanic serial killing in this phase we're talking about tonight. So we'll get into that a little bit tonight here, folks. And also on that, regarding vampires, in 1993, and I don't have my reference pointer in my book up here at the moment, but I'll do it on the Patreon side. In 1993, Rod Farrell, in 1996, they were claimed to be a 500-year-old vampire, right? In 1993, a different alleged 500-year-old vampire was apparently directing some teenagers to drink some blood on the steps of City Hall in Burlington, Vermont, on Church Street, the main entertainment little stores and retail area there. The cobblestone road where everyone, used to hang out before all the needles and stabbings went on. And the invasion of those Haitians that were sacrificing a chicken in the hallway that I saw. Anyhow, this vampire 93 was apparently a 500-year-old, not Rod Farrell 500-year-old, was apparently dictating these teenagers drinking blood on the steps of City Hall. And when the law enforcement eventually intervened after, a large crowd had gathered over some time, that 500-year-old vampire apparently pulled out a gun and just started going boom, 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 right in the air. And then I don't know if he just turned into a bat and flew away, but he went poof, the way of Houdini. So there was a lot of vampire shit in the 90s. I remember that one specifically. Anyhow, so on that note, folks of the interwebs, I do thank you all for joining me here tonight. To get a little GCD, I'm way behind anything being written in the comments, and I do apologize on that, and appreciate all commentary that y'all have added here. It's a day late and a dollar short. Thank you, Jimmy Bobby. You are a modern day philosopher. Speaking of a day late and a dollar short, that may as well be RR Channel's fucking logo or motto, dude. Anyhow, RR, appreciate your time, sir, and I appreciate all your time, folks of the interwebs, and I appreciate you joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. And again, patreon.com/Operation GCD for the remainder of tonight's tale, and Sundays on Saturdays, the Anatomy of a False Flag cover-up, and then Sundays on Sundays. Israel Keys invades Vermont. That satanic serial killer that, was connected to that Idaho Aryan Nations compound, knew the Keogh brothers, knew the fucking Timothy McVeigh. So, actually grew up fucking fundamentalist Mormon. Shocker. So anyhow, On that note, folks of the interwebs, let's just have one more message here before I go.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
Stay vigilant, folks. They got Ted twice. So, folks of the interwebs, catch you over on the Patreon side here shortly. If you catch us broadcast in the future, please join us on over there at patreon.com/Operation GCD. And on that note, I will catch you folks next time.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, Age rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.